All right, so let's dig in here. Now, first off, let me just give you a little bit of background on Photo 10. Photo 10 is the new name for the Perfect Photo Suite. So if you're a current user of the Perfect Photo Suite, Photo 10 is just kind of the next generation of that. We kind of wanted a name that kind of rolled off the tongue and was a little bit more modern. There's some really big changes in Photo 10 as well. We've worked really hard to make it quite a bit faster. So it's about 4 times faster than it used to be. Uses less memory and has a more modern user interface to it as well. We've made a lot of great changes in Browse. You're going to get to see some of those today. And we've made improvements to portrait. You can see those portrait enhancements in some of the other webinars that we've already done on Photo 10. Enhancements in color and tone controls, we're definitely going to show that today. That's what Fall Foliage is all about. And then we've also integrated resize into ON1 Photo so you can use it anywhere rather than having to go to a dedicated module. And there's some cool new mobile workflows that you can use as well. Now, please keep in mind, come on, computer. Please keep in mind that what we're showing you guys today is still a pre-release. This is not the final version. We're still about a week of bug fixing away and some final testing and installer testing before we're going to be shipping. So it'll probably be right about the end of October. And that's actually one of the biggest questions that I see from folks in the questions module is, when can I get my hands on it? And that'll be right around the end of the month. All right, everything you're going to see today is pretty much done, but things we're still working on stability. We're still working on speed. There might be still a couple little icons here and there that might be updated, but it's pretty baked at this point. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to mention that I can't really show when we do these webinars because there's kind of a screen lag. You might notice that when I talk, the screen might be a couple seconds behind, and when I make an adjustment or use a brush, it doesn't look as fast and fluid, and that's kind of this screen sharing technology that we use. But I want to tell you that we've spent a lot of time making the sliders and the tools more responsive and faster. And we've also done a lot of work with the actual algorithms, the math that does all the changes to the pixels to make those faster as well. Especially when you have a modern video card or GPU in your computer, we can share the work between the CPU and the GPU to get the work done faster. And unfortunately, with GoToWebinar, you can't really see that improvement. All right, that's enough slides. Let's actually dig in and get to work here. All right, I'm going to start off in Browse, and I want to spend a couple minutes actually showing you guys how to get your images into Browse so you can use it. But before I do that, I'm just going to pause real quick and make sure that there's no big questions that I missed. Nathan or Michael, any questions that we should address before we get into going?
Nothing outstanding right now, Dan, no.
Okay, cool, great. All right, so one of the big questions we get is how do you actually get your photos from your camera into the computer into Browse if you're using Browse to manage your files. And that's really easy. You just take your memory card and you plug it into your computer. I'm just going to insert one into mine. And if you watch over here in Browse, right in the local drives section, this shows me all of the hard drives that are attached to my computer or network shares or memory cards. And if you watch, as soon as I plug in that memory card here, in a second, we're going to see this drive is going to pop up. There it is right there, Canon DC for Canon digital camera. And when I click on that, it shows me the folders that are inside of it. There's that DCIM folder, that's where your pictures always live. And inside of that are numbered folders where the photos live depending on how many you shot. So here's some images from a fall trip that I did recently. To get those from your memory card to your computer, it's a really easy process. I'm just going to select all of them. Easiest way to do that is just to use the Control-A or Command-A keyboard shortcut on your computer, or you can go to the Edit menu and select Copy. This is pretty straightforward. You guys have all copied and pasted before. So I'm just going to select all, and then I'm going to go Copy. All right, so now it's remembered all those photos that are on that external memory card, and now I just got to decide where I want to put them. So let's talk a bit about organizing. I'm going to go to my folder section, and at the top I have my favorites. In Browse, I can create a favorite. A favorite is a place where I keep my photos, and Browse will keep track of it for me automatically. That way it's always faster to find my photos, it's faster to do things like searching, and I can do things like smart albums on anything that I put into my favorite. It just kind of keeps an eye on it and always keeps it up to date. So what I do is I keep all of my photos in one folder called Personal Images. And then inside of that personal images folder, I create subfolders based on categories. Now keep in mind, this is the way that I do it. You could do it based on date, or you could do it based on client. It really just depends on what you shoot and what your habits are as to the best way to organize your photos. But I would always say creating some sort of logical folder structure is the way to go. All right. The other thing that I do that's probably a little different is I have one folder called my inbox. And whenever I come back from a shoot, I put all my new stuff into that inbox folder, into a subfolder of its own. And that's where I keep all of my new shoots that I haven't really had time to go through and pick out my favorites and do any editing and throw out the ones that I don't like. So if I roll open this inbox folder, you can see I've got a few other shoots in there recently that I just haven't had time to go in and edit. And I think we all do that. You know, we have time to go out and shoot, but we don't have as much time to come back and edit on our computer. So the cool thing about having this inbox folder is I kind of have a place to go to where I always have new work. I don't have to go try to hunt it down. So in that inbox folder, I'm just going to add a new subfolder. And I'm just going to name it for the shoot so I can keep track of it. So this happened to be Fall in the Gorge. Oops, don't need my, there we go. So I've created a new subfolder that lives inside of my inbox folder. And if I click on it, you can see it's empty. There's nothing in there. And now all I do is I just simply paste. So I go up to the edit menu and select paste. And now it's going to copy the pictures that I picked off that memory card to my hard drive location into my pictures folder where that new Fall in the Gorge folder sits. Now, one of the other things that I do is I take my favorites, the place where I keep all of my photos, and I'm also storing those inside of my Dropbox folder. Dropbox is an online storage service, and there's lots of them. There's Google Drive, and Apple has iCloud Drive, Microsoft has OneDrive. And they're all different ways of storing your work in the cloud as well. And I think that's a great way to back up your photos. So what I do is I just make sure that everything that's one of my photographs just goes inside of that Dropbox folder, and they get backed up to the cloud automatically. That storage space is so cheap these days that you'd be crazy not to want to back up to the cloud. It really protects you from bad things happening, like someone breaks into your house and steals your computer, or you drop a hard drive, or Lord forbid there's a fire or a flood. This gives you a really secure place to store your photos that are protected, and you can access them from any computer, which is also handy too. You're at your friend's house and you just want to show them one of your pictures. You can log in through a web browser and show them those photos. All right, so there we go. It's downloaded all those photos. Now, while I have them all selected, let's add a little bit of metadata. It's always a good habit to do this when you download, when the thoughts are fresh in your mind. So to add some metadata, we're just going to roll open the right-hand panel. And I'm going to do that right over here by clicking at the bottom. There's a little button that'll open the right-hand panel, and that's where all of the metadata lives for these. I'm going to start up here in the author field, and I'm just going to put in my name. So this will add my author. There we go. And when I do that, it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to add this to all of these photos? And of course I do. That's what I wanted. So I'm going to say, don't ask me again. There we go. Say I want to add a keyword of fall to all of these. So in that keyword field, I just start to type. And you notice as I type, it automatically finds all the other similar keywords that I've used in the past. And what do you know? Down there is fall. So I can just select that. And it's added the keyword fall to all of those photos for me automatically. Let's say maybe I want to add Columbia Gorge as well. So as I start to type, you can see it finds Columbia Gorge, makes it really fast to find the keywords that you use all the time. It also helps prevent things like spelling errors. And this was shot in Oregon. There we go. And maybe I'll just type orange for a color. There we go. So we added a few keywords into it, and now all of those have that keyword, and now using the filters pane, I can search for any photo based on its keyword if it's in one of my favorites. All right, so the next thing to do is actually to take all of these photos and go through and pick out the ones that I like and get rid of the ones that I don't like. So when I do that, what I'll do is I want to get as much space as I can. So I want to close the left and the right drawer. And the easy way to do that is just to hit the Tab key on your keyboard. That'll close both of those drawers and gives you a nice full screen view of the photos. Then I'll double click to go into detail view so that I get a nice full screen version of that photo. Now it's time to actually go through and set my ratings and pick my favorites. One of the cool new features in Photo 10 is a feature called Auto Advance. So if I go up to the photo menu and I turn on Auto Advance, each time I change the rating or a flag or a like, it'll automatically move to the next photo. So what I do is I put my right hand on the arrow keys on my keyboard, and then I use my left hand to either mark it with a P, which will mark it a like, or a U leaves it alone, or an X marks it as a reject. So when I look at this photo, I think that it's a little overexposed. I'm going to reject it. So I just hit the X key on my keyboard. And it will auto advance. There we go. Sorry, the screen delay is a little slow there. And then if I like this one, and of course I can use the arrows to go back and forth to compare a couple of similar photos. Yeah, that one's not bad. I'll hit the P key to mark that as one that I like, as a pick or one that I like. I'm going to leave that one alone. And we'll just kind of go through these photos. And it becomes very fast to go through and pick the ones that you like, pick the ones that you don't like, so that you can take the ones you don't like and you can delete them, or you can only catalog the ones that you like into Lightroom from there. So I'll just kind of keep going through here. That one looks good. That one's a little too dark. So I'll hit the X key. I think I was probably doing some bracketing for some HDR shots. I'm going to hold on to that one in case I want to have smoother water and brighter shadows. That one's probably too bright, though. I don't need that one. So I'll hit the X key, throw that one out. Same with that one. Composition changed a little bit. That's all right. Let's keep going through here. So you can kind of see how it works. You can go through about a picture a second from a shoot, evaluating whether you want to keep it or not. And it's cool because you get this nice, big, full screen view of your photo without actually having to wait for it to catalog. It's actually pulling out those photos for us very, very quickly. And I don't have to wait as I go from photo to photo. All right, then once I've got that done and all of my ratings are set, the ones that I like and the ones that I don't like, I can return back to the grid view where I actually see all the thumbnails like this. And we open the left and right drawers back up again. And now I'm ready to, if I wanted to import those into Lightroom, I could do that. I could select just the ones that I wanted, Control click, and say send to Photoshop or send to Lightroom. It automatically detects those applications for you. You can also set up your own application. So let's say you like to catalog with a different tool. You catalog with Phase 1, for example. You could then just set up Phase 1 as an external editor, and you could send it to that as well. Or if you just use Browse, you can keep track of all of your photos in Browse all the same way. All right, let me pause here for a second and see if we have any questions out there.
There are quite a bit of questions, actually. A lot of people are curious about the DNG format, and there's a lot of questions around how all the metadata is handled. I'm trying to pick out a good one for you, Dan. Why don't you first talk about the DNG format?
I can talk about that a little bit. So we certainly support DNG, and if you create a DNG file, either there's a few cameras that create them directly, or if you use Adobe's converter and create DNG files, we can catalog and read those just like any other raw file. And when you make metadata changes, that metadata will get written back into the DNG file so that it gets transferred to other computers as well. We actually use the official Adobe DNG library for the reading and writing of those files. So you would get the same results you'd get out of Lightroom on DNG. Now keep in mind it's a little bit slower than our native raw processing. Now, if it's a regular raw file, then whenever you make metadata changes, that could be changing the stars or the ratings or adding metadata like keywords or author, that gets written to a sidecar file, an XMP sidecar file that just sits right next to it. And whenever you catalog those into Lightroom, or if you open them in Photoshop, it sees that sidecar file along with it and knows all of those settings as well. And that's because you can't really write that stuff back to a raw file. If it's a regular finished file type, like a JPEG or a Photoshop file, all that metadata changes actually live inside of the Browse database. But when you send a file to Photoshop, or you export it, or you use a save as, it'll automatically take all that metadata and marries it up with the file. You can also just go up to the photo menu and select the embed metadata option, and that'll do the same thing. That'll burn the metadata into the photo for you. Hopefully that answered the questions. Anything else, Nathan?
No, that covers it.
All right, now let's say this photo happens to be one of my favorites and I want to add it to an album. An album is a list of photos that I can keep It can either be a static list of just whatever I drag to it, so they could be pictures from lots of different places, or it could be one that I use as a smart album where I make it go out and find photos based on certain criteria if I want to as well. Well, I have one down here called my Fall Favorites. If I want to add this to it, I can just right-click and select Add to Album and Fall Favorites, just like that. Or I could drag and drop it, of course. But that gives me a way to keep track of my favorite photos or collections of photos so that I can get back to them easily. So if I click on my Fall Favorites album, you can see I've got a bunch of different fall pictures in there that we're going to work on today. So let's actually dig in and we'll talk about how to enhance your photos. I'm going to start off with this one. This is a photo from Matt Klaskowski, and I am going to click on the Enhance module over here in the module selector. So I think most of you guys who are with us today are upgrading from a previous version of 9 or 9.5 of the Perfect Photo Suite. The module selector used to live up here on the upper right. We've moved it over here onto the left instead, just because the monitors keep getting wider and the vertical space becomes more valuable at that point. So we've moved it over here onto the right-hand side. So you just click on the module you want. Right now we're in Browse, and then there's Enhance, and Effects, and Portrait, and then Layers. So I'm just going to click on the second one, which is Enhance. Now, whenever you open a photo from Browse, it's going to ask how you want to handle it. You can either edit a copy, or you can edit the original. Now, if it's a RAW file, you can't edit the original. This happens to be a JPEG. So I always want to treat even a JPEG that I shoot to my camera like a RAW file. I don't want to edit the original JPEG. I want to make a copy. So I select Edit a Copy, and then I can pick the format that I want to work in. I tend to like to use the Photoshop format because it keeps all my layers and my masks, so I can go back and re-edit those in the future. And when I check the Smart Photo option on, I can also go back and change any of the settings that I make inside of ON1 Photo. So any sliders, any masks, any adjustments I make in any of those modules, like Enhance or Portrait or Effects, I can go back and change. So there we go. And if you always use the same settings, you can check this little Don't Ask Me Again checkbox, and it'll just do the right thing for you every time. All right, so I'll click that. That's going to create a new Photoshop version of that file, and it's going to open it up here inside of Enhance. Now, Enhance, for me, is kind of my starting place. Almost every photo I work on that I'm going to do some editing on will go through Enhance because it covers the most basic things you need to do: adjusting brightness and contrast, improving the color, removing a color cast, adding a vignette. And if you're looking for kind of a what we would call a straight photo, one that looks like what you saw when you were there, Enhance is probably the best place to go. Now, to get started on a photo like this, I kind of need to identify what my goal is. And one of my goals is I want to bring back a lot of this information up here in the sky. The sky is kind of key, but the photo is what we call hot. It's a little overexposed, so we're losing some of that detail up in the sky. So to bring that detail back, I'm going to start off by adjusting the highlight slider. The highlight slider will take the brightest parts of the photo and either make it lighter or darker. I want to make them darker, so I'm just going to grab that highlight slider and I'm just going to move it to the left. And as I move that to the left, you'll see how it brings back more and more detail up there in the sky. So I get more information, the clouds start to become visible. I can enhance that even more by darkening the entire photo in general. I think this would help to make it darker. And that's actually, it's a very basic but great tip for working on fall photos, is to darken them up a bit. It doesn't take much, but as you darken a photo, the colors become visually more saturated. The colors will pop more. Without making any big changes, just darkening the photo a little bit kind of gives you a bit more of that warm, dark fall feeling. So I darkened it just a little bit. I can then come in, and maybe we'll go to more. Let's darken it even more. I'm going to go down about a full stop of brightness. There we go. The shadow slider you can then use to bring back shadow areas that got too dark. So I could increase it to the right to bring back that subtle shadow detail. And I want to have just a little bit of the shadows here in the foreground. I mean, the really interesting parts of these photos are the mountain range and kind of the color and the play in the hills, but I don't want this to go so dark that I can't see the detail in the shadows. So that shadow slider, bringing that up just a little bit, keeps that right where we need to be. All right, then the last two I will adjust are the whites and the black slider. The whites and the blacks set kind of the endpoints of your contrast range. An easy thing to do is to hold down the J key on your keyboard or click on the histogram up here in your navigator so that you can actually view a histogram. hold down that J key, and then I'm just going to adjust the whites and the black slider until I see just a little bit of clipping. So in this case, when I hold down the J key, I already see I've got a little bit of pure black down here at the bottom. You can see where the overlay on the screen is turned blue. That tells me that is pure black right there. And every photo in general should have a little bit of pure white and pure black in it. So I'll just grab that black slider, and I want those to be even just a little bit darker. So if I move it to the left, you can see how the blue grows a little bit. This is kind of a visual decision to make. Same thing with the whites. As I increase those whites, you can see how I start to get red in areas where they turn pure white. I want to be very careful not to lose highlight definition, so I want to be right on the edge of pure white with this photo. There we go. All right, so we've adjusted the exposure, and then the shadows and highlights, and the whites and blacks. Just making that change right there has really changed the mood of the photo. It's taken it from kind of a bright midday feel to a much later in the day feel. So there's before, and there's after. So you can kind of see it has more of an autumn feel to it. Now, we can continue to improve that. I'm going to use the detail slider to really bring up the small contrast, what we call the micro contrast in this foreground in those leaves. Leaves love to have just a little bit of detail added. So I'm going to bring that up, not too much, probably 10, 15, just enough to make the leaves pop. And then we can tweak the color to make it a little warmer as well. So I'll just grab the temperature slider. I'm going to drag it to warm. There we go. And bring up the vibrance a little bit. There we go. That's looking even better. And then maybe I'll finish it by adding a vignette. So I'm just going to click on the strong vignette option here to add vignette. Let's turn that preview on or off. So there's before, and there's after. All right, so there's your first couple tips for working on fall photos. Start off by darkening the photo and making sure that you have the proper contrast range by setting those white and black points. Then add a little bit of warmth and a nice vignette. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second and see if we have any questions before we move on to our next photo.
Oh yeah, definitely, Dan. There's a lot of questions. People are asking about keyboard shortcuts as well.
I'm sorry. I am probably using lots of keyboard shortcuts and not telling you what they are. So that J key, holding down the J key, is the one that shows you your clipping. That's a really important one to know. That shows you what's pure white and pure black in your image at any time. The other one that I probably use a lot is actually the keyboard shortcut for turning the preview on and off, and that's the slash key right next to your return key on your keyboard. We tend to always try to use the same keyboard shortcuts that Adobe uses in Lightroom and Photoshop because so many of us use those tools as well. It's nice to be able to remember those same keyboard shortcuts. So when you're using brushes, things like the bracket keys will make them bigger and smaller. All of that works very close to the way they work in the Adobe apps. You can always see what the keyboard shortcuts are by going out to the Help menu and then go to Show Keyboard Shortcuts. And this will actually open up a little palette that will show you all the keyboard shortcuts for where you're working, just like that. Or in the menus, when you click on an item in a menu, most of the time it will actually show you the keyboard shortcut in the menu as well. So if I wanted to save a preset, it's Command-Shift-S. All right, other questions?
Nope, I think we're good for now.
All right, so I'm going to hit save, and that'll save this photo. I'll pop back here to browse. All right, and now you notice in Browse, there's a copy of the photo. There's my original photo right here, and then next to it, there's the Smart Photo copy that I made of it. When I click on a Smart Photo over here in the right-hand pane in Browse, I'll actually see a thumbnail of the photo, and it will tell me which modules I've used on it. So in this case, I had used Enhance. If I had used Enhance and Effects, I would see Enhance and Effects. If I want to go back and re-edit the settings that I used, all I do is I just double-click right there on Enhance. So let's say I did that, and I think the vignette's a little too strong. I don't want to change that vignette. I'll just double-click on that. It'll open the photo back into Enhance. It will load in all those same settings that I'd used just before I hit the Save button. So it's right where I left off, and then if I want to change something, I can change it. So let's say I want to use a subtle vignette instead of a strong vignette. There we go. And now I hit save again, and it saves those settings. So everything that I do is re-editable. I can go back and change it, even things like retouching. So if I went in and did retouching, or if I'm working on a portrait, anything that I use with the eye and mouth control points, or in effects, anything that I brush with the brush tools, all get remembered and they're all re-editable. All right, so let's move on to another photo. We're going to use effects for this one. I'm just going to grab this fall leaf shot. I love fall leaves. And it's funny, you know, when you're walking around work or around town, you just step on pictures like this, you know, 100 times a day, and you don't realize just how beautiful what's under your feet can be. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open this up in Effects. I'll use that same option. I'm going to edit a copy as a smart photo. That way I can go back and change my settings. And now we're inside of Effects. Now, Effects is quite a bit different if you're a previous owner of Effects. So let me open up the presets on the left-hand side. I'll just click on the little arrow over here to open up my preset drawer. You'll notice that over here on the left, there's a tab for presets and a tab for filters. So in the preset tab, there's a bunch of new categories, and we've kind of organized these based on genres or different types of photography that you want to pursue. There's always the recently used, which keeps track of your most used presets, and at the top, your favorites. So anything you mark as a favorite will appear in that favorite category. And we remember wherever you left off now, which is really handy. So if you always work out of your favorites, it'll remember that you were in your favorites the next time you launch. The filters tab over here, there's one filter for each of the filters that make up effects. Keep in mind the way effects works is by stacking filters on top of each other, just like you would on your camera. You know, if you're out shooting a fall day, you might put on a polarizer and a warming filter and then maybe a graduated neutral density. It's the same idea. You're just doing it in your computer. You might stack up instead a color enhancer and a tone enhancer filter. Now, you can either start with a preset or start with these filter settings, or you can just manually add things over here in the overall options pane. So if I wanted to manually add a filter, I just click on the Add Filter button, and it'll pop up that same list of filters, and I just pick what I want. And this is a skill that you build over time, figuring out what the things are that you want to change in your photo. Presets are a great way to learn about what those options are. Once you kind of get the hang of effects, a lot of the times you're just going to work over here on the right-hand side just by picking the things you want to work on. Now for me, the first thing I want to do in this photo is I really want to make those water droplets pop. So I'm going to use one of my favorite filters. It's dynamic contrast. So we'll add a dynamic contrast filter. There we go. So you can see how just by adding that at its normal settings has really pumped up the contrast in the scene without having any really bad things happen. Now, on something like this where I'm really concerned with the finest, smallest details, those little droplets of water, the intricacies in the leaf, what I really want is to use a lot of small detail and leave the medium and large detail pretty low. Let me show you kind of what the difference is between these. I'm just going to take all of these and set them to 0, so we're not adding anything. That's actually a really good shortcut for everybody to know, is if you double click on the label of a slider, it automatically resets it to 0. So I'm going to take the small slider and start at the bottom. I'm going to start with the large slider, and I'm going to bring it way up. So you can see as you bring up the large slider, it's going to take the biggest edges, the biggest portions of contrast, and increase them. But it's going to leave the smaller stuff alone. The times that you want to use a lot of large is when you have typically architecture or big cloudy sky. You really want the clouds to pop out. But on something like this, I don't really have big, strong edges, so I'm going to leave that back at 0. The medium is kind of in between. It'll attack the medium-sized stuff. That's not bad for this photo. But again, for something like this with all that fine detail and I really want to make it pop, I'm going to use the small. I'm going to turn that way up just so you can see what it does here. There you go. Wow, you can see how it has really brought out all the tiny little details in the leaves and the water droplets. Now, that's pretty high. I'm not going to go up to 100. Let's probably use it around 50 or 60. I'm still using it pretty high today just for illustration purposes. We'll add a little bit of medium to taste. There we go. And there, that looks pretty cool. We've done a great job of bringing up the local contrast in this photo. Now let's improve the color. To improve the color, I'll just click on that Add Filter button again. And this time, I actually want to go use a preset. So I'm going to come over here to my search field in the bottom on the left-hand side. I'm going to type in what I'm looking for. I'm looking for one called the Fall Enhancer. There we go. As I start to type that in, I'll find a fall enhancer right there. I click on it, and this will find just the fall colors and enhances them. So it takes all of the reds and oranges and yellows and brings up the color, but just on those, just like that. So let me turn that on and off. So in effects, to turn a filter on and off is just like it's always been. You just click in the corner to turn it on or off, just like that. Now, to tweak it, there's the opacity slider, which lets you control the overall strength of the filter, or you can adjust any of the settings below. In this case, I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit. Again, just kind of changing it to taste. There we go. That looks pretty good. You could also mask this filter, so you could paint it in or out, or you could use the blending options tool to have it affect only certain color or tonal ranges. It's very flexible. Last thing, I'm going to add a vignette. We'll click on that Add Filter button and add a vignette. I'm going to use one of my favorites. It's called Big Softy. There we go. All right, let's take a look at the before and the after. So there's before. That's the out of the camera version. And then after. And all we did was we used dynamic contrast to bring up those small details and make the water droplets pop. And then we used a preset called Fall Enhancer, which takes the fall colors and makes those pop. And then I added a little vignette around the edge to really focus your eye in the middle. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second and see if we got some questions from the audience.
Yeah, Dan, a lot of customers have their own presets they've made in Suite 9, and obviously they've got presets we've given out with loyalty rewards. What will happen to those presets in 9 when version 10 comes out?
Sure, that's a great question. So any presets that you've installed, as well as any textures or backgrounds or borders that you've added using the Extras Manager, all of those will get migrated over to 10 automatically. So any presets you've created will appear when their categories, the same categories that you view them in today in Perfect Effects, you'll view those same categories here inside the Presets tab in ON1 Effects. Same thing with your textures and borders, those will all appear as well. One of the other really cool things about 10 is we've kind of simplified these preset filter experience. There used to be a separate tab for favorites, and there was your presets and our presets, and you could edit your presets, but you couldn't edit our presets. We now install everything at the same level, at the user level, so you actually have the ability to save and move and delete the presets that we provide with it as well. So if there's a preset that you like, but you want to adjust it a little bit, you can load that preset, adjust it, and then go up here to the preset menu. And it's grayed out right now because I don't have a preset selected, but there's an option called Update Preset with Current Settings, and that makes it your version of that preset. And then you can mark that as a favorite, and it'll appear in your favorites, and it just makes it a lot faster to get your work done that way. All right, other questions?
No, but I did want to add earlier, when you were talking about keyboard shortcuts, a lot of people are asking about those, and I just want everyone to know that you can always look under the Help menu and click Show Keyboard Shortcuts to see a list of all the keyboard shortcuts.
Yep, go right up here to Help and Show Keyboard Shortcuts. And that brings up a little dialog that shows you all of the different keyboard shortcuts for where you're working, just like that. All right, this looks pretty cool. I think I actually want to post this to Facebook. So here inside of Effects or inside of Browse or any of the modules, you notice there's now a share button. Now keep in mind this is a Mac-only feature right now. We're working on this for Windows for the future. So I just click on the share button, and I could email it, I could catalog it into Apple Photos, I could post it to Flickr. I'm going to send this one to Facebook. So I just click on Facebook. It'll generate a version, and that's the right size for Facebook and the right format for Facebook, and then I can post it on here. So I'm just going to say, this is fall leaves shot from my webinar today. There we go. And I'll hit post. And now that photo that I just created in Effects is actually posted to Facebook. You notice I also left the ON1Pics hashtag on there so that other people looking for pictures edited in ON1 will be able to find this picture. All right, let's go on and move on to our next shot. Let me just save this photo, and we'll go back to Browse and grab another one. All right, so the next one I'm going to grab, and we're going to talk about how to selectively change colors in a photo, which is a pretty handy technique to have for a fall photo. So I'm going to take this Nikon RAW file, and we're going to send it to Effects as well. So this happens a lot when you're photographing in the fall. You get these gray, cloudy skies, which kind of leads to this lackluster contrast in your foreground. And depending on how good the fall foliage is and how quickly the seasons are changing, you might still have a lot of green or a lot of yellow in your leaves, and you really want to take those and make them look brighter and more orange. So I'm going to show you a technique to bring back that contrast and to really enhance the color. And it's kind of my 1-2 punch for fall photos. I'm going to start off here in Effects, and I'm going to add the dynamic contrast filter. There we go. I'm just going to use the natural option in this case, but I'm going to bring the large slider down just a little bit. There we go. So that's brought back the initial contrast in the image, and it's brought in a little bit of micro contrast into the leaves. Let me turn that on and off again. Being pretty subtle here. There's before and there's after, just enough to bring back some contrast. Then this next step is to add a color enhancer. So I'll click on that Add Filter button and click on Color Enhancer. Now, when most of us use the color enhancer, we're thinking about using it for removing a color cast, which it does a really good job of. You just click the auto button up here and it will detect a color cast and remove it for you. There's also a handy little gray clicker that you can click on a neutral target to suck any off color out of the image as well. But you can also use it to affect a certain color range, and this is what I do all the time for fall photos. Come right down here to the middle section where it says color range. Normally it's set to all, but when I click on that, I see a range of colors that I can select. You can then, on a color by color basis, shift its color, its brightness, and its saturation. So I'm going to start off with the greens. I'm going to grab the green colors, and I'm going to shift the greens further to the yellow. So if you pay attention to these couple trees right down here in the bottom that haven't quite turned yet, by moving that closer to the yellow side, it'll start to make them look more yellow. Then I'll go to the yellow color and I'll shift the yellow to be more orange. There we go. And I'll bring its saturation up a little bit because I really want those oranges to pop. And I'll do the same thing to the orange or the red. I want to shift those to be a little bit more orange and a little bit more vivid color. There we go, just like that. So let me turn that on and off so you can see what I did. There's before, that's the out of the camera raw. And then using that color enhancer, I was able to make it look like much more vivid, much more fall colors just by selecting the color ranges that I wanted to affect and then adjusting their hue and their saturation. All right. I'm going to hold here for a second and see if we have any questions. And that, by the way, is actually what that Fall Enhancer preset that I used earlier did for me automatically. So it actually picked those ranges and increased their color and moved them to the warmer side. All right. Any questions out there, Nathan or Michael?
Yeah, going back to when you were showing the share, twofold question here. One was, is there an Instagram option available? And the other question that was popular is, how do I add a watermark to that image before I submit it?
Okay, so two good questions. When you share, we use whatever sharing services you have set up on your Mac. So for me, when I click on the share button, I'll get mail on Twitter and Facebook and Flickr, and my messages was like a text message. That's the stuff I have set up. But there's lots of other services you can go on into your system preferences and enable. So if you use Weibo or another social media network, you can turn those on and they'll appear in this list. Now, unfortunately, Instagram has not built an extension for OS X to make themselves appear in that list. They only allow you to share from a mobile device. And that's a decision that's Instagram's, not ours to change. The other question is if I wanted to add a watermark to it. So if I wanted to add a watermark, I would click, rather than on the share button to start, I would click on the export button instead. When I click on export, the export sheet will roll in here from the right. It's got to process the image for me, and this happens to be a D800 image, so it'll take a second to process it. There we go. Now, I'm just going to reset everything in here. if I wanted to add a watermark, first I'm going to pick the file type I want. I want to make a JPEG, and I'm going to use, let's say 80% quality on the compression. I can pick where it goes. I'm going to put it on a folder. I'll just put it on my desktop to keep things easy. I'll leave it named the way it is, and then to add a watermark, I probably want to resize it too. So up here at the top where it says Export Resize, there's a plus button. From here I can add other things. Let's say I wanted to downsize it. Again, I said it's a D800 file. That's too big to share. So I would select Photo Size, and now I can pick something more modest. So let's say I want it to be, I'm going to resize the long edge to 1000 pixels. That's probably a little better for sharing online. When I size it, I can pick which resize method to use. I'm going to use the landscape option because it's a landscape photo. I can also sharpen it while I'm here. Usually when you size something down quite a bit, it gets a little soft, so adding a little bit of sharpening is good. And then to add that watermark, we'll just pick watermark. There we go. It shows me my photo. I can then go pick a file that I want to use for a watermark. Let's go see if I have something we can use for this. There we go. We'll just grab the ON1 logo in this case. I can pick where it's going to go in my photo. I'm going to put it in the middle. I can control how big it is, and I can control how strong it is, how opaque it is. I'm going to set it to about 50%, put it in the middle of my photo. There we go. And I could even then save that as a preset, so I can use it over and over again. Let's say this is my watermarked JPEG for sharing preset. I click on Save Preset, and I'm just going to call this, let's call it JPEG for sharing with watermark. There we go. Now that'll appear in my preset list up here in the export pane, and anytime I want to do that, I can just pick a preset. I don't have to configure all these options each time. Then I can take that photo from Browse, and then I can share it to social media using that same sharing option again. All right. Other questions before I move on?
Nope, that's it. Well, actually, a lot of people are asking about the dehaze. Do we offer a dehaze, kind of like a similar program out there?
So we have some great haze-reducing presets that Matt Klaskowski created. They live over here in the presets section, and they actually use that dynamic contrast filter. Dynamic contrast does a great job of cutting through the haze and bringing back the contrast. So I would encourage folks to look at those new haze-reducing presets right in there. All right, I'm going to do one more thing to this photo. I want to bring back the sky a little bit. I'm just going to click on Add Filter, and I'm going to use the Adjustable Gradient filter. With the Adjustable Gradient, it uses the masking bug so that I can apply an effect or a filter to just a certain portion of the image in a nice re-editable way. So right now it's making it lighter. I don't want it lighter, I want it darker. There we go. I just click in the middle of that bug. I'm just going to drag it up here. Actually, I kind of like it right about there because that will darken that hill in the background. As there's more water vapor in the air, you get that perspective distortion. Things that are further away get softer. They lose contrast. By putting the line here, I can actually darken that hill in the background too. And then I can use the sliders to tweak it. So I'm just going to bring the compression slider up. I'm trying to bring back some of the detail on the clouds, brightness down a little bit. Maybe I'll cool it off a little bit too here, so we really kind of have that nice warm, cool change between the foreground and the background. There we go. Let's take a look at our overall before and after. So there's our original shot right there out of the camera. And there we go by enhancing the fall color, bringing back a little bit of that sky. All right, cool. I think we have one more trick that I want to show you guys. Any questions before I move on, Nathan?
No, nothing outstanding right now.
Okay. Let's grab the shot. All right, this is, again, right out of the camera. This happens to be a raw file from a Canon camera. And I love this fog that's drifting through these little valleys and canyons. I really want to bring those up and enhance them. So I'm going to go to Effects. All right, first thing I want to do is I want to improve the color. To me, the color is just a little bit off. So I'm going to add a filter, and we'll add the color enhancer. There we go. And to me, it feels just a little bit on the green side. So I'm just going to grab the tint slider, and I'm just going to adjust it up to taste. Now that's too far. That looks pretty magenta. So I'm just going to bring it back until things look a bit more natural and neutral to me. There we go. Maybe even just a little bit cooler on this dark, rainy day. There we go. Again, pretty subtle adjustment, just tweaking the color a little bit. Next step, I'm going to add a filter. And let's add that dynamic contrast again. Now, rather than using dynamic contrast on the whole image, I really only want it right down here on this block of trees in the foreground. Now, here's a cool trick that you can do. We can go to the blending options. Each filter that you add, you can adjust it so that it only affects certain color ranges or protects certain areas. So it really lets you apply it to just where you want. I'm going to roll down that roll down the blending options, and rather than having it apply to all in my photo, I'm just going to have it apply to the shadows. Those trees in the foreground are kind of a darker shadowy area. So by picking that shadow option, I've removed the dynamic contrast from everything except for that little clump in the foreground. And I can adjust how precise that is by using the range slider. See, if I bring it all the way to the left, we get none of that effect. And as I bring it up, it'll start to add that contrast, but just to the shadows. And if I brought it all the way up, it would apply to more and more of the image, but I really only want it just in that foreground. So we'll go about 40–50%. Cool, just like that. So that's kind of made these little foreground trees pop off my background. And then the next step I want to do is I want to take these white clouds, this fog, and I really want to make it stand out more. I want to make it actually more noticeable. And a great way to do that is to use the adjustment brush. So we'll add a filter, click on adjustment brush. There we go. Now the adjustment brush is kind of like the adjustable gradient. It lets me selectively paint things in just where I want. So I'm going to use the lighten option. That means wherever I paint, it's going to lighten. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I don't need it as strong as 70. And we can fine tune all these settings after we paint. You notice when I bring my mouse over the window, it's automatically selected the right tool. It selected the masking brush for me, and it's set to paint in. I'm just going to go up to this little gear up here, my tool options bar. I'm going to turn on the perfect brush. The perfect brush will detect the colors underneath the brush as I paint. So what I really want to do is I want to take just the brightest whites in the fog and paint them even brighter. So I just bring my mouse over the fog at one of its brightest spots. I'm going to click, and I'm going to hold down the Command key or the Control key if you're on Mac or Windows. And what that does is it stops it from sampling color. So now as I paint, it's only going to apply to just the whitest whites that look just like the rest of the fog. So even though I've got my Control key held down, it'll only paint in those areas. So there we go. I'll do the same thing right over here. Click and hold down that Command or Control key, just like that. And that will make that fog stronger. And you can keep doing that to fine-tune the results that you get. So I really just kind of want that fog to pop out a bit more. There we go. And you can use the brightness slider after the fact to fine-tune that so you can set it just the way you want. So I'm going to add just a skosh. That's a scientific term, a skosh of brightness to those clouds. Let me turn that on and off so you can see just that cloud portion. See, you can see how we just took that fog and made it pop out a bit more from the rest of the scene. And then one last step, there's this cool edge between the fog and the treetops that we can see. And those treetops I want to make pop out a little bit more. So we're going to use kind of the same technique. We're going to use another adjustment brush. So I'll add filter, I'll click on the adjustment brush, but this time I'm going to click on the detail preset. That's going to paint in extra detail. Basically, it's going to let me paint in dynamic contrast just where I want it. So there we go. And now I'll just paint right along the edge of those trees. Now the cool thing about it is it doesn't really affect the fog because there's no detail in the fog. It's already white. So I'm just going to paint along the ridge line just to kind of make those ridge lines in the trees and the treetops pop out a bit more so they're a little bit stronger, just like that. All right, let's take a look at the overall before and after. There's before out of the camera, and after. We tweaked the color a little bit, and then we made the fog brighter and brought out the ridge line so we could really see it. All right, I think we got time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, Dan. A lot of people are asking about what RAW files are compatible with the Photo 10, so I sent a message there in the comments section to everyone with a link to a list of all the RAW files that are compatible. I believe that most all cameras that people have been calling out are indeed supported, but you can double check by clicking that link for the RAW file compatibility. Also, I wanted to tell everybody that's asking when are they going to receive Photo 10, and I believe that is before the end of the month. So if Halloween comes and goes and you haven't received a download link and license for ON1 Photo 10, reach out to us, but we will definitely have it to you by then, okay?
Yep, we're just kind of putting the final spit and polish on it right now.
Other than that, there were a ton of questions, so if anybody has a question that wasn't answered, you can email cs@on1.com. I'm going to send out another link for the FAQs, which are, I think, answer most people's questions. So if you want to read over that FAQ article that I'll send out to everyone, it's got some good information there as well.
Well, cool. Well, I thank everybody for coming today. Again, this is recorded. You can watch it again later. You can watch it at your own pace. It'll be on the blog or on the Learn section of our website or our YouTube channel, I believe. And there's also lots of other great videos and webinars that we've done recently on ON1 Photo 10. Lots more coming after we ship at the end of the month as well. If you haven't purchased your upgrade, you can go to the website and you can get a good deal on that right now. Or if you've never purchased before, you can get that as well. There's a great launch premium. You get tons of video tutorial trainings from Matt Laskowski to help you get the most out of it. I thank everybody for watching. Have a great day.